When we think of ancient civilizations like Greece or Rome, we tend to think of them as warlike and violent places.
But it wasn't all that way.
In fact, they had some pretty good ideas about art and architecture, and they even made one of the tallest statues ever in history. This is the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Hey there, and welcome back to my channel. The Colossus of Rhodes was an enormous statue of the Greek sun god Helios that straddled the entrance to the harbor in the city of Rhodes. It was built around 280 BC after Rhodes successfully defended itself against an invasion by Demetrius Poliorcetes, son of the famed Macedonian king Ptolemy I. And it stood there for about 50 years until it was destroyed by an earthquake in 226 BC. But why did they make him? Why do we make huge statues of gods? Well, part of it is just to show off how big and powerful they are. But it's also partly to show off how rich and powerful the city of Rhodes was. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, Helios is the sun god. So he isn't exactly associated with the city of Rhodes, who would have been located over here. And you'd be right. Helios was actually more associated with the island of Rhodes. And this actually makes sense because islands tend to be kind of isolated. So the people who live there look to the sun god Helios as their patron. Of course, if you were from mainland Greece and you took a boat trip to Rhodes, you would immediately recognize the statue of Helios as a representation of the sun. So maybe they put it there to welcome sailors to the island. In any case, the statue is one of the bronze statues, meaning that it was made out of metal rather than stone. Bronze statues are incredibly difficult to make because they require a lot of skill and precision. First, you have to get a mold just right, or your statue will be ruined. Then you have to fill it with molten metal, which is no easy feat considering bronze melts at 1790 degrees Fahrenheit, almost 1000 degrees Celsius. And then you have to clean up the statue and make sure it's smooth and shiny. It was a very complicated process, but the end result was well worth it because bronze has a number of advantages over stone. For one thing, it's much lighter, so it can be taller without needing a lot of support. And since it's made out of metal, you can reuse it. If you decide you don't like it anymore, you can take it apart and melt it down. And finally, bronze is naturally magnetic, which means it conducts electricity. Back in ancient times, people didn't really know where lightning came from, but they knew that it sometimes hit statues made out of metal and not statues made out of stone. So to protect the Colossus from lightning damage, they built a huge network of insulated wires inside the statue and connected them to the ground. The statue was built by a man named Chares of Lindos, who is one of only 3 people ever to build 2 of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. We don't know much about him except that he was from the Greek island of Rhodes and that he finished building the statue in 280 BC and it stood 330 feet tall, nearly 100 meters, which is about the height of the Statue of Liberty before it got its torch. To put it another way, it was about as tall as 10 giraffes stacked on top of each other. It weighed about 60 tons, which was roughly equivalent to 18 African elephants. Some historians argue that the statue was actually built in the shape of the sun god Helios, driving his chariot across the sky, but we don't have any pictures or written descriptions, so we don't really know what it looked like. All we know for sure is that it straddled the harbor and it had huge arms. It doesn't seem likely that it was actually driving a chariot, given that that would have required wheels and trying to balance. Wheels on a 60-ton statue that sways in the wind would have been incredibly difficult. But the statue probably had some sort of crown or helmet. And according to one Roman writer, it was so tall that it had 2 crowns, one on the top of its head and one on the bottom. The statue was hollow, which is lucky because otherwise the earthquake that knocked it down would have crushed it into a pancake. People could walk inside the statue and climb to the top of its head by a spiral staircase built into its torso. There was a small room at the top where people could store things and enjoy a fantastic view of the harbor. It would have been quite a sight to see, this gigantic bronze statue of the sun god with people climbing around inside of it. Sadly, the statue only lasted for about 50 years. In 226 BC, a major earthquake struck the island of Rhodes, causing the statue to collapse. It lay abandoned and broken for hundreds of years until the island was conquered by the Italian dictator Mussolini in the 1930s. Mussolini decided that he wanted to rebuild the statue to show the world how great Italy was. So his engineers set to work excavating the ruins. They found the statue's massive legs, which were buried under a bunch of rubble, and set about cleaning them up. But when they started digging, they quickly realized that it wasn't going to be a simple project. The statue's legs were covered in centuries of grime and dirt, and it was clear that it would take a lot of work to get them back in shape. Rather than continue the project, the Italians just left Rhodes and headed over to Greece to finish the excavation of the ancient city of Athens. After World War II, the British occupied Rhodes, and the British didn't feel like messing around with broken statues, so they just left it alone. Today, archaeologists are still searching for the Colossus's remains. It's possible that they may never be found, but even if they are, it's unlikely that we'll ever rebuild the statue. It's too expensive, and besides, most of the statue would need to be filled in with modern materials, kind of like what happened with the Statue of Liberty. When they were restoring it in the 1980s, they found that the inside of the statue had completely corroded, and they had to fill it in with concrete. So it's probably better that we just leave it where it is. And we know that the statue fell into the sea, but what if it didn't? What if it collapsed onto the city? Would it have been as bad as you think? Probably not. See, the statue was hollow, and it was also built with earthquake-resistant technology in mind, similar to the modern skyscrapers in Japan. So it would have been able to withstand most earthquakes that hit the city. And even if it did break, most of its weight would have been concentrated near its base. So while the base might have collapsed, the rest of the statue might have stayed standing. Of course, that still wouldn't be good because people would have been killed, but it could have been much worse. And while the statue didn't survive until today, it still inspires awe in us because of how awesome it must have been to see. When you're at the harbor in Rhodes, you can't help but wonder where the Colossus is hiding and what it looked like. And while you might think that this statue is one of the biggest in the world, you'd be wrong. In fact, the Colossus of Rhodes was only the 7th biggest statue in the ancient world. Did you know that? Let me know in the comments below.
Thanks so much for watching. Bye.